Hello everybody! I am back from my unplanned absence this past week due to unhappy circumstances. Last weekend my aunt died. It was very unexpected and very shocking because of that. And I was not okay for a couple of days. I wasn't in any state to be filming last weekend, so I decided to just take a break from a lot of internet stuff actually. So I am okay now. My immediate family is okay. I will hopefully get to see my uncle and my cousin soonish. But I have a small family. We are very spread out across the country. We don't get to see each other very frequently. And I just feel super inadequate when I'm hundreds of miles away and all I can do is text. Like, there's nothing else I can really do. And it's hard to travel. So I'm trying to get back to normal things now. I've been in this funk all week and I'm trying to shake that off. And I thought one of the best things to do would be to film videos on the weekend like I usually do and talk and get out of my own head a little bit. I've been alone with my thoughts for a bit too long. So this video is going to be my weekly wrap up from the first week of June, the one that I missed filming last weekend, and I will catch up on the rest later. So I'm going to start off with Sphinx by Garréta, which is translated from French by Emma Ramadan. This was an impulse purchase. I bought it not because of the story at all, which is usually why I buy books, but I found the cover of it to be very appealing. This is cover design by Anna Zilich, I think. This is one of Deep Vellum Publishing books. I think they focus on publishing translated fiction, and I just thought, hey, it's by a woman, it's translated, I like the cover, I want to try reading one of Deep Vellum's books, so I bought it. And I was reading the introduction and realized that I actually already knew about the book and the author, I just hadn't put the pieces together. So Garréta belongs to the Oulipo. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but it's like a French writing group that focuses on experimental fiction written with constraints. And I'd heard of the really famous example of an Oulipian novel before, which is one of the founding members, a man who wrote a book without ever using the letter E in French. I'd heard of that before, and I'd actually heard of Garréta as well because I think she was one of the younger members or the first woman inducted into the group or something. So Sphinx is an Oulipian novel written with a constraint, and I'm going to tell you what that is. I think there are like two schools of thought. People who don't want to know what the constraint is in books like this because they want to discover it for themselves, and then people like me who want to know what it is up front because that's part of, you know, appreciating the book and seeing how it was done. But also I think it's just really difficult to explain what the book is without mentioning the constraint. So this is a genderless love story. The genders of the unnamed narrator and their lover are never revealed. So it's about a DJ in a nightclub who becomes infatuated and in a relationship with a dancer from a cabaret. And the fact that it's written without ever indicating their genders is, I think, really interesting in the original language. I appreciated the book a lot more when I read the translator's note at the end, which is, it's at the end because it has a lot of spoilers in it. But, you know, French is a highly gendered language. It's very difficult to avoid gendering people in that language, whereas in English it's a lot easier to avoid gender. You just have to avoid using pronouns sometimes. So when this is rendered into English, I think some of that achievement might be lost if you don't know something about French gender and grammar and everything. So I found the translator's note at the end to be really, really interesting. So yeah, it's a tragic love affair, basically. You know going into it that it's not going to be happy just from the way that the narrator is describing things. And I liked the love story a lot more than I thought I was going to. I thought, oh, do I really want to read about people falling into love and lust with each other and then it ends badly or whatever. But actually it was very well done and I was very interested in the entire thing. And there's a little bit of a twist. I wouldn't call it a twist, but the way that it ends, like the last third of it, did not go the way I expected it to. It was very, some very abrupt events that made me kind of sit back and go, okay, I did not see that coming, but let's go with it. But mainly I really enjoyed it because it's written well, and I just loved the idea of how it was written with that particular constraint. I am not entirely sure that I think that this book actually avoids any insinuations of gender or stereotypical gender roles. It does avoid using pronouns, for example, but I think it's pretty easy to assume gender, especially if you're like me and you have a lot of internalized gender stereotypes. A DJ in a nightclub is more likely to be a man. A dancer in a cabaret is, I think, more likely to be a woman, for example. Though I will say that there were some parts in the middle where I was suddenly convinced I was reading about two women. But yeah, I liked this far more than I expected to. It was very interesting. I would love to read some more Ulipian novels, and I think that Deep Vellum may have published a couple of others. Maybe I will definitely be looking at their catalog and seeing what else by them I want to read. At the same time that I was reading Sphinx, I also read Headon by John Scalzi, which is also a book that avoids gendering the protagonist, which is really interesting to see how it's done in these two books. So Headon is the sequel to Lock-In, which came out 4 years ago, I think, and I don't remember that much about Lock-In. It was one of the earlier books I read by Scalzi. I remember thinking that it was good but not amazing, but I really enjoyed the FBI investigation style plot and stuff. So I was really looking forward to Headon and getting back to this world, which is kind of like light contemporary science fiction and, you know, your detective style of story and everything. And I really flew through this. I loved it. It's such a fast-paced story. So in this world, an illness called Headon syndrome has caused a lot of people to become locked in. They're alive, but they can't move their bodies at all. And to help these millions of people in the world, robotic bodies are built for them that they can control with neural networks. And these robotic bodies are called threeps. The protagonist, Chris Shane, is a Headon. They use a threep to get around, and they work for the FBI investigating Headon-related crimes. So in this book, there is a game called Hilketa that's played with threeps, and the idea is you rip the head off of one of the threeps and carry it through the goalposts and things like that. It's like a really violent version of soccer or football, I guess. But then one of the players in this big important game dies during the game, which should be impossible, and Chris and their FBI partner investigate to determine if everything's on the up and up and that everything was handled properly, and then the body count starts going up. So as far as the investigation and the plot and everything, I really enjoyed that. Sometimes I'm really in the mood for detective style investigation stories like that, and I think this was a really good example of that. One thing I did notice in this one, kind of related to Chris and their gender never being revealed and such, is you never really see Chris in off-work situations. You do see them with their parents, but even those scenes are about work, about business, about investments, about the investigation. And I have to say that I think it might be a little too easy to avoid talking about Chris's gender or preferences and such, because Scalzi never shows the character in more intimate situations. The character's always working, and even when they're at home with roommates and stuff, they're still working. They don't have a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a significant other, and they don't spend that much time with relatives either. And I kind of wanted that. I wanted to know a bit more about Chris as a person outside of being an FBI agent, I guess. So maybe that will happen in future books. I got done with this and I really wished that the series was like 10 books in so I could just keep binging. I could read one of these books every day for a month probably and not get tired of them. So that tells you something about how enjoyable it was. Then I finished my reread of Raven Stratagem by Yoon Ha Lee, which is the sequel to Nine Fox Gambit. I did a review of this the first time that I read it, so I will link that. Though in retrospect, I think that that review just barely scratched the surface. I did not mention or really pick up on some of like the major themes and stuff going on in the series overall the first time round. So I enjoyed this even more the second time, and I think I really understood the point of the series and the themes so much better the second time round. Also, I really like Mikadez. I think he's an easy one to hate. He does some awful things and his family is so messed up, but I really like Mikadez. I'm halfway through reading the third book, Revenant Gun, right now, and I'm wishing there was more Mikadez. I love seeing so much of him in this one. So, good reread. And then I read a really difficult book, which is So Lucky by Nicola Griffith. This short little novel, it's more like a novella, is about a successful woman. She's a director of a nonprofit whose life seems to fall apart in about a week. Her wife files for divorce. Her friend, who might become her girlfriend, leaves to go work for a year in Australia on the other side of the world from her, and then she collapses and is diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and loses her job, loses her life, and is really angry about it and wants to do something about it. This is probably, it's too easy to call this autobiographical, I guess. But it's definitely an own voices novel. Griffith does have MS, and you get the sense that she's absolutely experienced the things that this woman in the story experiences, and it's really kind of a scathing portrayal of how people with disabilities are viewed and treated, especially if they have a visible disability, and just how awful the healthcare system and health insurance is, and, you know, employers, you know, getting rid of or firing employees when they are diagnosed with disabilities and stuff. It's very unflinching. It's very raw about that stuff. It was uncomfortable. But I felt like as a healthy, privileged, able-bodied person, I really needed to read a story like this from this perspective. I needed to know, you know? I needed to know and think about my own behavior, honestly. So an excellent read because of that. It's also really well written. Like, it's not just a book you pick up because it's good for you, but it's a good story. It's very well written. I appreciate and I love Griffith's writing style immensely. This book also had an added complication for me, which made it difficult to read, and that's that it describes the symptoms and the diagnosis and the treatment plans for MS in quite a bit of detail, and that triggered my hypochondria so bad. This is short. I should have been able to read it in a single sitting in an evening, and it actually took me 4 or 5 days to read it in small portions because I would start getting very anxious and I'd have to stop reading and go do something else. It's been a really long time since I read a book that triggered me like that. I'm usually good at avoiding these sorts of things, but this was so specific, I guess. That's why it affected me so much. So once again, I highly recommend it. I think it's a great read and people should read it, but if you're like me and you know this sort of thing might trigger you, you know, take care of yourself, basically. And the last book I have to talk about today is The People in the Castle by Joan Aiken, which is a collection of strange short stories. I read one story from this, The Cold Flame, when it was published on Tor.com, and that story was so good I immediately wanted to get this entire collection and read a bunch more by Aiken, and I really liked this. There's something about these stories, the age of them when they're set, the way that they're written, the way that a lot of them end, that took me straight back to my childhood when I was reading things by people like E. Nesbit and Saki. These stories range from the 1950s all the way up to the 1980s and 1990 actually. So some of them are quite old, some of them are a bit more recent. And I think I really enjoyed all but 2 or 3 of the stories in this. They were really great. So I really liked A Leg Full of Rubies, A Portable Elephant, which is rather odd but very interesting, A Room Full of Leaves, Humble Puppy, The Cold Flame, and Watkin, the last one, which is really great. I think a lot of these stories actually feature a kind of ghostly element, but I didn't feel like any of them bordered on horror at all. They were definitely a bit suspenseful and strange, but not outright scary in any ways, and I like that kind of balance between the fantastical and a little tiny bit of the scary, especially in children's stories, which I think a lot of these are intended to be. So yeah, this was a very solid collection, and I want to read a lot more by Aiken. I would really recommend reading The Cold Flame online, which I think will give you a really good sense of whether you would like the other stories in this collection or not. It's a really great example. And that is everything that I read in the first week of June. It was actually a really good week, wasn't it? It's a bunch of 4-star books. I had a lot of fun with these. So let me know if you've read any of these, or if you want to, leave me some comments down below. And I'll be back to talk to you again very soon about more things that I read in June. And until then, bye.